Richard Stammers. I'm a visual effects supervisor, and in the credits, that's quite often in the main title credits. This is actually one of the 3D prints we did of Dumbo at the final stages of his design process. I mean, this represents what was sculpted as a CG model. Once we sort of got to this point, we actually produced full-size versions of this that the cast members could then sit on and just check that the scale of the body works for him. We were very conscious of not feeling like we were being particularly cruel to this little baby elephant with people sitting on him, and actually as part of his design process and part of the story, he grows during the story of Dumbo. So by the time they get to a point where anybody actually flies with him, he's actually already grown a little bit.
Welcome, baby Dumbo. We're all family here, no matter how small.
My first job was actually in Australia. I was doing a round the world trip after I'd left university, and kind of ran out of money in Sydney and sort of hassled a few companies, and eventually got lucky with a company called Animal Logic. They saw what I was able to do straight away, and they gave me a job for a couple of years out there, and that allowed me sort of to develop my talents and sort of use fairly cutting-edge computer technology, which really kind of got me in a great place for when I returned to London to be able to work in a lot of the high-end facilities and design companies. Back in the sort of mid-90s. First time I met Tim, it was, we talked about my background and what the expectations were and how we'd sort of go about the project. And, the first thing that came up was we needed to design our hero for the film. And that was certainly the first part of my role, is, identifying what Dumbo needed to look like. How do we reimagine what was a classic cartoon animation in the Tim Burton style. The first steps for me were really kind of looking at how the design of him was going to be executed, and that was a combination of sketches and sculpts and 3D models. And we'd do that concurrently with animation tests as well, because it was not only important what he looked like, but also how he moved. That was a huge part of his character. So that really was an important thing to inform everybody in the production, as well as Tim, about, well, if Dumbo's going to look like this, he's got these huge ears, you need a bigger head to hold these bigger ears. And Tim wanted these bigger eyes, he wanted to keep the blue eyes from the original cartoon. So there were certain things that we knew we had to aim for in terms of a design, but also the size of his legs and the shape of his body and how he'd walk and things like that became very important things, because a huge part of his character was his sort of his body motion, and often used to a really high degree as sort of really selling what his emotions are. Understanding all of that early on, before we even started doing a real shot, was really important. And with that was, how does he fly? How do you make a 90-kilo baby elephant look like it can fly without, falling out of the sky? And how far are we going to have to suspend disbelief to be able to achieve that? How big do the ears need to be when he's flying to really gauge any sort of sense of realism? And I think we realised pretty quickly that there's a big cheat involved in there and a massive suspension of disbelief. But it's sort of getting it to a point where there's enough effort in his animation to sort of help sell that idea. The build process of realising him as a CG character is quite a lengthy process, and a number of months still go on in terms of getting all the texture details and the skin simulation, the muscle rigging. Every movement that our elephants made in Dumbo, not just Dumbo himself but also his mum, involved quite a huge rigging process of building the whole skeletal structure, the muscles that drive all of that then drives the fat and the skin that moves. And we came up with a lot of new bespoke ways of dealing with the way elephant skins sort of stretch and squash when they move, and there's such a huge amount of detail that needs to be represented in that type of motion to create a realistic effect. So there's a lot of people that are involved in every step of the way to sort of bring him to life from that point of view. And I think that the visual effects crew kind of can be up to 1,000, if not more, people across the whole show. I'm often sort of asked of whether the original cartoon is a reference for the animation or useful from that point of view. There were some really interesting poses in there and beautiful moments that we did try to capture. But from an animation point of view, we very much have to look at reality. We're trying to create a photoreal elephant that fits within a live-action film. So it's incredibly important that his motion is represented as realistically as possible. So we looked at video footage, we went to zoos and videoed animals to look at their behaviour, to make sure that we can incorporate some of that subtlety into his body motion. Quite often I'm not really exposed to all the individual nitty-gritty details. I don't necessarily see every step of the way, and for me, I need to be able to step back and be objective about the show overall and not get involved with too much of the minutiae of every single step. And I think that's a really important part of understanding my role as an overall visual effects supervisor, is to try and see the bigger picture and trying to help realise Tim Burton's kind of vision for the film.